Hook Plus subscribe CTA. The entire saloon went silent when the dirty drifter stepped through the swinging doors. His boots were covered in mud, his coat was torn, and blood stained the sleeve hanging at his side. Most men looked at him with disgust. Some laughed. One gambler whispered, "That man won't survive the night." But the saloon girl carrying a tray of whiskey and stew looked into his tired eyes and saw something nobody else did: pain. She offered him a hot meal for free, not knowing the starving stranger sitting in the corner secretly owned half the territory, and by sunrise, powerful men would kill to keep that secret buried. Before this story begins, subscribe now and join thousands of listeners who love dramatic Western romances, shocking betrayals, and unforgettable endings that keep you awake long after the story is over. The rain slammed against the windows of Dust Creek Saloon like bullets fired from heaven itself. Wind howled through the cracks in the old wooden walls while gamblers cursed over poker hands and exhausted ranch workers drowned their misery in cheap whiskey. Clara Bell moved carefully between tables carrying bowls of stew, ignoring the rough hands that occasionally reached for her dress. She had learned years ago that surviving in the West meant keeping your head down and your emotions hidden. At 24, Clara had already buried both parents, escaped an abusive stepfather, and spent the last 5 years working endless nights in the dirtiest saloon in Wyoming Territory. The owner, Gus Harper, only cared about profits. To him, Clara wasn't a person. She was simply the pretty face that kept lonely cowboys spending money. Yet despite the bitterness life had poured into her soul, Clara still carried a dangerous weakness inside her heart: kindness. It was the kind of kindness that got people hurt in places like Dust Creek. The doors suddenly burst open so hard they slammed against the wall. Cold rain exploded inside the saloon. Conversations stopped instantly. A tall drifter staggered into the room wearing a soaked black coat and a battered hat pulled low over his eyes. Mud covered his boots almost to the knees. One side of his face was bruised purple. His beard looked untrimmed for weeks. The stranger scanned the room carefully, like a hunted animal expecting violence. Some men laughed immediately. Others reached subtly toward their guns. In the West, drifters usually meant trouble. Especially wounded ones. "Get out," Gus barked from behind the counter. "I ain't running no charity house." The drifter said nothing. He simply walked toward an empty table in the darkest corner and sat slowly, clearly hiding pain with every movement. Water dripped from his coat onto the wooden floor. "You deaf?" Gus shouted. "You got money?" The man reached into his pocket and emptied it onto the table. 3 coins rolled across the wood. The entire saloon erupted with laughter. "That won't buy whiskey for a rat," one cowboy sneered. Clara watched quietly while wiping a table. Something about the stranger bothered her. Not fear. Something else. Most drifters carried arrogance or desperation in their eyes. This man carried exhaustion. Deep exhaustion. The kind born from betrayal. Gus stormed toward the table. "You got 2 choices, drifter. Buy a drink or get thrown into the storm." Before the stranger could answer, Clara stepped forward nervously. "I got leftover stew in the kitchen," she said softly. "I was gonna throw it away." Gus glared at her. And maybe he could have it." The room fell silent again. Gus laughed harshly. "You feeding stray dogs now?" Clara ignored him and carried a steaming bowl to the drifter's table along with fresh bread. Up close, she noticed how unusual his eyes were. Gray, sharp, intelligent, not the eyes of an ordinary wanderer. "You don't owe me," he said quietly. "It's just food," Clara replied. The stranger looked at the bowl for several seconds before touching it. Like he hadn't seen a hot meal in days. Then he began eating slowly, carefully, with surprising manners completely unlike the rough cowboys around him. One gambler smirked. "Careful, girl. That drifter might fall in love." The room laughed again, but the stranger never looked up. He only continued eating while Clara returned to work. Hours passed. Rain hammered the town relentlessly. Customers gradually stumbled upstairs or disappeared into the night. Near midnight, Clara swept near the drifter's table and realized he had barely moved. The bowl sat empty. "You should find shelter," she whispered. "Storm's getting worse." The man finally looked directly at her. "Why are you helping me?" Clara shrugged weakly. "Maybe because nobody helped me when I needed it." Something flickered across his face then. Not pity. Recognition. Before he could answer, the saloon doors opened again. 3 armed riders entered wearing expensive coats darkened by rain. Every conversation stopped instantly. The men carried themselves with the confidence of killers who never feared consequences. Their leader, a scar-faced rancher named Boyd Cutter, scanned the room slowly. Clara's stomach tightened. Everyone in Dust Creek feared Boyd Cutter. He controlled cattle routes, gambling operations, and half the local lawmen through violence and bribes. Men disappeared after crossing him. Women avoided looking him in the eye. Boyd approached the counter, looking for someone. Gus forced a nervous smile. Maybe we can help. Boyd removed a folded paper from his pocket. A bounty poster. Clara froze when she saw the drawing. It was the drifter. $5,000, Boyd announced loudly. Dead or alive. The saloon exploded with murmurs. Clara looked toward the corner table in panic, but the drifter remained perfectly still, almost calm. What did he do? Someone asked. Boyd smiled coldly. Stole from powerful people. Then his eyes locked onto Clara. You seen him? Her heartbeat thundered painfully. Every instinct screamed to tell the truth. Yet something stopped her. Something about the quiet man who had thanked her for a bowl of stew like it actually mattered. No, she whispered. Boyd studied her face carefully. You sure? Clara nodded. For a terrifying second, Boyd seemed unconvinced. Then suddenly gunfire exploded outside. Everyone jumped. One of Boyd's men rushed to the window. Horses got loose. The three bounty hunters stormed outside cursing into the rain. The instant the doors slammed shut, the drifter stood painfully. You lied for me, he said quietly. Clara stared at him. Who are you? He hesitated. A man who trusted the wrong people. That bounty poster says $5,000. I know. That's enough money for people to kill their own family. A sad smile touched his face. They already tried. Before Clara could speak again, Gus grabbed her arm angrily. You stupid girl. If Cutter finds out you hit him, we're all dead. The drifter reached into his coat slowly. Gus stepped back nervously, expecting a weapon. Instead, the stranger removed a gold pocket watch engraved with initials. Will this cover the food? He asked calmly. Gus stared at the watch in shock. Even Clara could tell it was extremely expensive. Where'd a drifter steal that? Gus muttered. The stranger ignored him. Outside, Boyd's voice roared through the storm. The drifter looked toward the door. I need a horse. You won't make it, Clara whispered. They'll hunt you. They already are. Then he surprised her. What's your name? Clara. He nodded slowly like memorizing it forever. Thank you, Clara. Before she realized what she was doing, Clara grabbed his sleeve. Wait. He stopped. There's an old barn behind the saloon, she whispered quickly. Nobody uses it during storms. The drifter stared at her in disbelief. You'd risk helping me again. I don't know why, she admitted honestly. But I think you're telling the truth. For the first time all night, real emotion cracked through his guarded expression. Most dangerous thing a person can do, he murmured, is trust someone. Then he disappeared through the kitchen door moments before Boyd and his men stormed back inside dripping rainwater and fury. The storm lasted until dawn. Clara barely slept. Every sound outside made her heart race. She kept imagining Boyd discovering the hidden barn. Or the drifter sneaking away during the night. Yet when morning sunlight finally crept across Dust Creek, Clara quietly slipped outside carrying bread and coffee. The barn smelled of hay and horses. She found the drifter awake beside an old lantern, revolver resting near his hand. In daylight, he looked worse. Exhaustion shadowed his face deeply. You came back, he said. You're hurt. It's nothing. It's bleeding through your shirt. He glanced down casually at the dark stain spreading near his ribs. Clara knelt beside him before thinking. Let me see. I'll survive. That ain't what I asked. Something almost amused flickered in his eyes before he carefully unbuttoned the coat. Clara inhaled sharply. The wound looked nasty. Deep. Bullet grazed me 3 days ago, he explained. 3 days. She whispered. You should be dead. Been close a few times. Clara cleaned the wound using water from an old barrel while he remained strangely silent. You never told me your name, she finally said. He watched her carefully. Elias. Just Elias. For now. She rolled her eyes softly. Mysterious drifter act gets old fast. Unexpectedly, Elias laughed quietly. A real laugh. Low and warm. Clara realized then she hadn't heard genuine laughter in months. You always this stubborn? He asked. Only with men too proud to admit they're dying. Their eyes met briefly. Something shifted between them then. Something dangerous. A sudden shout outside shattered the moment. Search every building. Boyd. Elias instantly grabbed his revolver and stood despite the pain. They're searching town, Clara whispered fearfully. Elias moved toward a crack in the barn wall and peeked outside. His expression hardened instantly. How many exits? Back window. He nodded once. But before escaping, he turned toward Clara. You should leave town. What? Boyd Cutter kills witnesses. You really think I can just leave my life behind? His jaw tightened. If they discover you helped me, you won't have a life left. Footsteps approached outside. Clara's pulse pounded wildly. Suddenly Elias stepped closer, his voice low and intense. If anyone asks, you never saw me. Then he climbed through the rear window and vanished behind the barn seconds before Boyd kicked open the front door. The rancher's cold eyes scanned the room instantly. Clara forced herself to stay calm. You hiding someone? Boyd asked casually. No. Boyd walked slowly toward her. Funny thing about lies, Clara. They got a smell. She refused to back away. Boyd's hand suddenly grabbed her chin painfully. You're too pretty to die over a stranger. Before Clara could respond, one of Boyd's men shouted from outside. Tracks heading east. Boyd released her roughly and smiled. Looks like your drifter's running. Then they mounted horses and thundered away. Clara collapsed against the barn wall, shaking. Hours later, Dust Creek buzzed with rumors. Some claimed the drifter robbed banks. Others believed he murdered a governor. Clara tried ignoring the gossip while serving drinks, but her thoughts kept returning to Elias. Something about him didn't fit the stories. Even wounded and hunted, he carried himself differently. Educated. Controlled. That evening, an elegant black carriage rolled into town. Everyone noticed immediately. Rich visitors rarely came to Dust Creek. Two well-dressed men entered the saloon asking questions quietly. One carried silver cufflinks worth more than most ranches nearby. Clara overheard enough to realize they were searching for Elias too. But unlike Boyd's men, these strangers looked worried rather than angry. Finally one approached her directly. Miss, he said politely, have you seen a man traveling alone? Tall, gray eyes. Clara hesitated carefully. Why? The man exchanged a glance with his companion. Because if Mr. Blackwood dies, he whispered, this territory burns. Clara froze. Blackwood. The man lowered his voice further. Elias Blackwood. The name hit like thunder. Everybody knew.